All right, day 3 of writing our literary analysis for our fiction writing project. Today, we are going to back up the evidence that you found, the quotes that you found in your text yesterday, we're going to frame them between the context and the reasoning. So let's look back at the basic argument slide, right? So on the first day, you came up with your claim. And then yesterday, you came up with 3 quotes that you thought demonstrated that your claim is true. And now you're going to come up with the context, like what is happening around this evidence. This puts the person who's reading your analysis in the mind of what's happening in the story. So it just doesn't seem like it's, cut out in the middle of nowhere. And explaining. So this is really where the deep thinking takes place, is explain how the evidence proves your claim. You can't just say, this shows it. You have to say why. How does it show you, right? So let's look at the steps. So your reasoning is making the connections. And this is the hardest part for most people and a lot of 6th graders is the reasoning. So you're explaining your thinking behind how you think the evidence supports the claim. Let's look back at something real quick. Okay, so here we go from Thank You, Ma'am. Right? And the claim, so you kind of have to see it all together. The claim is seen that Roger is actually trustworthy, even though he attempts to be a crime, right? That's your claim here. The evidence we have is when Mrs. Jones asks him if he will run, he responds, "Yes'm." Okay? So how does that demonstrate that he is trustworthy? So you're trying to explain, well, you see, in this situation, right, he could have run, but he chose not to. And we are inferring that he chose not to because he wants to gain her trust. He wants to show her that he is accountable for his mistake, right? He's a decent person. So I'm explaining how that evidence is backing up my claim. So that takes a little thinking, right? And the context is showing, where is this happening? Where is it that she's asking him if he'll run away? So we're giving the reader some idea where this happens in the story. And it says, at the beginning of the story, Roger attempts to steal Mrs. Jones' purse, but she stops and questions him. So you kind of get a sense, even if you haven't read the story, okay, this is kind of the beginning of this story between these 2 characters, and here's what's happening. So the context is very important too. That's a little bit easier to come up with because you're just telling what's happening in the story. The reasoning is where you're showing your logic and your thinking. All right, so that's pretty much what you're doing on day 3. You're writing your reasoning and your context. I said to use that graphic organizer example in slide 17. I think I wrote that before I knew that we came up with a piece. Let's see, do I have this here? With the graphic organizer that is in the folder. I think that is much more useful. You could do it this way, but you could also use the graphic organizer, which is basically this, that is in the folder for the materials for this week. All right, why don't we go on to day 4, since this is pretty short. Day 4 is you have all this information, right, in this outline, and now what you want to do is to pull them out of the graphic organizer and write them out using transitional words to connect the sentences to make it an essay. So if you need an example of what that might look like, again, go in the materials for this week. And there is a student example. Let me get it up for you. It looks right here. And, oops, I'm going to move this over. Okay, so this is, yeah, here it is. So it says in the Book of George by, and it tells you the author, it tells you the claim, it has the evidence and the context and the reasoning, and I think this goes on to continue to be the second one and the third one. So this is what I wanted you to pull it off the graphic organizer and actually type it out and connect to the ideas. So you'll have to do a little bit of revising. But that is what we're focusing on for day 4. And let's double check. I don't have this all memorized. And then step 2 is, after you have it all written out, you have options. So it would be nice if you could have someone read through it and make sure if it makes sense. Because sometimes it makes sense to you in your own mind because you can fill in the blanks, but once someone else reads it, they see the holes that you might not be seeing. If you don't have anyone everyone's busy and there aren't a lot of people in your house, then I would suggest reading it aloud to yourself. Because if you do that, you might hear some things that don't sound right, or you're like, oh, okay, I need this word here, or I left out something. So that's a good strategy when you don't have someone else to give you some feedback, is to read it aloud to yourself. And I will come back on a different video for day 5.